and we will get started. So again, welcome to all of you. I want to introduce our special guest for this afternoon. His name is Mr. Nigel Atwell. He is an attorney, a former special education teacher who went into law specifically to help families like yours who have children who have different ways of learning, different abilities, and help them to better be able to navigate the system. So this forum, we plan to have hopefully once a month to be a support group for other families who are in this predicament, sharing these challenges so that we can share resources and knowledge and experience. But Mr. Nigel Atwell, I want to thank you so much for your expertise, knowledge, and being available here this afternoon. Go.
Much for asking me to join us.
All right, so I'm going to ask you to start off, please, by telling the group about your evolution. I just gave kind of a quick snapshot about you being a former special education teacher, but can you talk a little bit more specifically about your evolution and your journey and specializing in educational law?
So you were right. I did teach public school. I wasn't a special education teacher, but I was a general education teacher in DC public schools. And how did I come to do that? Well, I was a corporate lawyer for many, many years, and I didn't really like what I was doing. And I decided I was going to leave law practice. And I just went through this sort of period where I asked myself, what is it that you really enjoy? Because I'd struggled with staying in the law for many years. Even as a young man, I was in my 20s. Thought to myself, why did I do this? You know, I wanted to become a doctor. I became a lawyer. What am I doing? But I got to the point where I just didn't like what I was doing. It's funny, the job that I had was probably the best job by the way most people would measure job satisfaction. So I was making a lot of money. I liked the people with whom I worked on the job. The work was intellectually stimulating. I really didn't like it. I didn't really feel a sense of purpose. And so I asked myself this question: what do you enjoy doing? I had always tutored kids, volunteered as a tutor for my church or for my college fraternity. And I got a lot of satisfaction from that. So I decided to make the crazy, at least in many people's eyes, decision to leave law practice and go and teach public school. So I left law, went and got a master's degree in education from George Washington University. And then I began to teach in the DC public schools. And I taught for DC public schools for about 7 years, and I had a variety of experiences. So I taught, my first school was a school that was primarily attended by Black and brown children. And it was actually a mixture. So actually the largest sort of ethnic group in the school, they were African immigrant children, and you had Latinos, and then you had African Americans. So I left that school after a year, and I went to another school in Northwest Washington, which was it was all African American, and I taught a single-sex classroom. I taught all boys, which was really interesting. It was challenging, and it was probably one of the most rewarding years I ever had. Then I left that school because it closed, and I went to go teach at the public school in Georgetown, which was attended by the children of well-to-do white individuals, some middle-class African Americans, and then some working class and poor African Americans. So, and then also we had a very substantial group of international students. These were the children of folks who worked for embassies, whose parents had come to live and serve their countries in the Washington area. So that was a very, very interesting mix from sort of a background standpoint for all the kids, and also politics. Let's not mince any words. In every organization or group of people, that's operating for a particular end, there are politics. There are politics in the school environment, and that was a huge issue in every single school where I worked in. So I did that for 7 years. While I was at that last school, when you're teaching school, you really don't know what you're doing for the first few years. You're trying to figure out how to be good at what you're doing. And for the first several years, my head was down trying to figure out how to become a great teacher. But in particular, at that last school, as my head sort of came out of the sand of just trying to become a great teacher, I started to pay more attention as to how children were disciplined in the school. I started to pay much more attention as to how children with special needs were being serviced. And I noticed the racial biases, the class biases, the biases against children with disabilities, the neglect of children with disabilities. And I did not like it. And I began to speak up. And, as often happens with any employee in any organization, when they speak up against something that's wrong, you get ostracized, you get vilified, people start attacking, all that happened. And so I found myself thinking, there is no way that I can sort of address these issues, I feel, in an adequate way by staying inside. And so I decided to come back out of teaching and then practice law. So I've got this law practice, which I consider a civil rights practice. So I practice special education law, and I also do employment law. And the special education law, of course, trying to obtain specialized instruction and related services for children with disabilities. I also have a very special interest in representing parents and children where parents believe that their children have been either harassed or abused or neglected while in school on the basis of their disability. That's a huge issue. And so this is what I do, and I'm enjoying it, and I'm happy to be here to talk with you about what your questions are, in particular, your anxieties, because we're now living in the pandemic. And those of you whose children have IEPs, you're wondering, how on earth are they going to service my child? Provide unique instruction to my child pursuant to an IEP when they're doing it online.
Exactly.
My child gets occupational therapy or physical therapy. How are they going to provide that? If my child gets behavioral support or counseling services, are they going to provide that online too? Right. So I'm here to, and some of this, I'm not going to have the answers to.
Okay.
Some of this, I think many of the schools don't have the answer to, because they spend so much time this summer supposedly trying to train to give good instruction online, or dealing with the issue of whether they're going to open at all, that they haven't had time to really make this online instruction that are planning for the fall to be great and robust and actually serve. So it's going to be interesting. But anyway, I'll be quiet and willing to answer some questions.
Well, no, I don't want you to be quiet, but let's talk in general. I think we have, on the call, like a wide range of experiences and people on different parts of the. So can you give just basically an overview of the process from assessment and diagnosis to actually identifying what specific services a child might need? So if a parent suspects their child disability or delay and are in need of special education services, who would that parent, like, where do you even get started in the process?
Right. So, I think the very first thing that comes to my mind in the hypothetical situation that you just raised is, parents, whatever you do, you express that your child, that you believe that your child is showing symptoms of some delay or learning disability or some attention issue or some health concern, as in like a health issue that you think impacts his or her ability to access the education that the school is giving. If you want to go ahead and you should let the child's teacher know, the teacher and the special education coordinator for the school. You can do that verbally, but I'm going to urge you to do this in writing. All right? If you want to approach your teacher, that's fine. You want to approach your special education coordinator, I recommend you do both. You copy the principal as well. And then if you want to do it verbally, fine, but make sure to follow up in writing. Why do I say that? Because there are so many times where I have seen parents, or parents have come to me and said, you know, I told them that I suspected my child was having a problem with accessing the curriculum or some other issue. And you know what? They sat on it and they didn't do anything for 6 months. Well, and my next question is, well, how did you tell them? Well, I told them verbally. Well, it's then your word against theirs about when you raise the issue to them. So that's the first thing. You need to inform school officials that you're concerned about your child's learning, and ask for a meeting to discuss it, right? Because you suspect your child has a disability. Now, mind you, also the school also has a responsibility when it suspects that a child may have a disability to do something about it, right? And this obligation is called a child find obligation. So, if the school suspects, they also have to initiate this process to figure out whether the child has a disability. And so once either you've informed the school or the school of its own initiative has determined, we think that something's not right here and that this child may need to be evaluated, that's what you're asking for. You're saying, I have an issue. I think my child is struggling. You can ask directly for your child to be evaluated to determine whether or not your child has a disability, right? That's really, I mean, you can call it step 2 or part of step 1. You're notifying that you have a concern and that you want your child to be evaluated, okay? The school may say, look, before we evaluate your child, we want to try some things to see what is going on with your child, if your child can make some progress. We want to assess the child, determine, see if what you're saying to us makes any sense, then assess the child, monitor him, try some interventions before we go to the route of evaluating the child. You don't have to wait for that. You can demand, I want my child evaluated to determine whether he has a disability. And so now we're at a point, when you make that request, the school, if there's a reasonable basis for it, the school hopefully will say, okay, we will evaluate your child. And they have to evaluate the child in all areas of suspected disability, right? So if you think your kid has a reading issue or some type of learning disability, they have to evaluate him for a learning disability of some kind, right? Or if there is some other concern, we talked about things like occupational therapy or physical therapy, or if there may be a behavioral concern that might require evaluation. So you share what you think the school suspects, what you think what your suspicion is about a disability or the areas. It's something with his learning, his ability to manipulate objects. It could be a cognitive issue, meaning there's something wrong with his brain function or her brain function. It also could be a behavioral issue. It also could be a health issue that's impacting his or her learning, right? So let's pretend that the school says, okay, we're going to evaluate your child. Well, what they will do is they will then marshal all of the evaluators who are licensed and have the ability and training to evaluate your child in the area that you have shared is in the area of suspected disability, okay? So with respect to sort of academic and cognitive, and I'm going to make a distinction between the two. Your child's academic achievement means to me, how well will that child do in a math class? Or what are his math skills? The child's cognitive abilities are, what is the child's, the ability of the child's brain to perform certain functions, right? And so they will then engage, often a school employee of the school system, a psychologist who will perform both academic assessments and cognitive assessments of your child. And it's a series of tests that they will use and that they will administer to your child, and they will score these tests, and then make a determination of what the problem could possibly be. And if you suspect that there might be an socio or emotional issue, they will also evaluate the child for socio-emotional problems that the child may be incurring as well. And and so the school will engage all of the professionals to evaluate your child in all of the suspected areas of disability. And then these professionals, the psychologists, they could hire an occupational therapist, a speech therapist, sometimes where there's some serious brain issues. I don't know, maybe if your child suffered a traumatic brain injury or cancer, it might be appropriate to hire, for the school to engage a neuropsychologist to perform the evaluation. When they're finished, they will write a report. They will share that report with you as well as the school-based IEP team. And then you and the school-based team will get together in a meeting and determine whether the child has a disability, right? And there's a law called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which lists a variety of disabilities that a child might have, or that the team can decide that the child may have. And so that's sort of the first part of this process. Does the child have a disability that's listed in the act? The second thing that the team has to determine is whether the disability affects the child's learning in the school environment, right? So it's one thing if you have a disability, but it's something else if the child's disability impacts learning, right? So that's a sort of another criteria in this whole IEP process. The child has to have a disability, it has to impact the learning. And then the third part is the team has to determine whether specialized instruction is required in order for the child to be able to access the curriculum or to learn, right? So there's three parts, it's like a three-legged stool here. If the team determines that all three legs are present, then that child is eligible for special education under the IDEA. And the IEP team will issue some written communication to you saying that the team has made this determination. And then following that, assuming that you as the parent agree, then the school will develop an individualized education program for your child.
Okay.
And so it's that IEP document that has all of the goals and it'll, before it lists the goals, it will list those. I sort of summarize what the various evaluations said about your child as a result of the assessments. And it'll then list out some goals, some academic and or behavioral and or other goals for your child. It may also list some accommodations that your child may need. It may also list if your child requires transportation to and from school. So that is a summary of the how you get from, I think my child needs to be evaluated, to an IEP.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. So when you were talking about, going to the school and, asking them to do all these assessments and tests, I guess it brings up a question that I've always had. Like, I think I've always advised people, like, it's best to start out with your local public school, right? Because they're kind of on the hook for providing these things, the test, everything, like it's all covered. It's all in your taxes. So make it happen there first. That I know for some people, there's a perception that private school has more or has better, and that may not be the case. That it's best to kind of start out with your public school and go from there. That's my perception, but can you speak to that?
Well, let me speak about it in this context. There may be individuals on the call whose children attend public schools, and there's some whose kids may attend private school. So The IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, is a federal law that requires public schools to provide a free and appropriate education to children with disabilities. So it imposes this obligation on public schools because the federal government gives money to public schools. And this is sort of a condition under which they give this money. We give you this federal money, then you are obligated to fulfill these obligations under IDEA. The IDEA does not apply to schools that do not receive federal money. So let's pretend that your kid goes to a private school and that private school really is private. They don't accept any federal money. Well, if that's the case, then they're not obligated to all of the terms and conditions and the obligations under the IDEA. So that's a huge issue, right? If you're in a private school and your kid is struggling, they don't have to spend money to provide specialized instruction and related services to your child. So if your child needs physical therapy or speech services, a private school doesn't have to spend that money. So if you want to obtain those services during the school day, certainly one option is to go to a public school to get those services. Now, there may be some situations where you can obtain services from the state during the school day in your child's private school. So, I mean, how you can arrange that, that would depend on your state, right?
Okay.
But the private school itself is not obligated to provide these services and the specialized instruction that I just described, right?
Okay.
And so that's a huge difference. Now, I have seen situations where children are in a private school. Again, you suspect your child has a disability. Private school's not obligated to evaluate them. So you go and you decide that you're going to unilaterally, you're going to go and take your kid to a psychologist or a reading specialist, and that psychologist determines that your child is dyslexic. Okay? That school is not obligated to provide any specialized instruction. It's a cost. They don't have to do it. What you could do, and I've seen this done, is in this case where the parents like, well, look, I know that my kid's not going to make progress in this private school. They told me that they will not help him, or in some cases they just don't have the resources to help, right? So I'm going to withdraw my kid from this private school and enroll him in a public school, and I'm going to tell the public school, hey, here's a copy of my kid's evaluation. It's from his psychologist whom I engage. Here's a copy of the report. Please let's have a meeting to determine if my child is a child with a disability. And that process that I described earlier, it would have to start in the exact same way. So now you already have an evaluation in hand. It has concluded that your child is dyslexic. The public school may have their own psychologist review that, and they might say, yep, this report is good. It meets all the metrics. We agree your child is dyslexic, and let's determine that your child is a child with a disability, and then they would provide the services, specialized instruction and other services that your kid may need to address that dyslexia.
So let's go back to talking about IEPs and the difference between an IEP and a 504. And can you give some examples of what would be maybe even inappropriate IEP goals?
Sure. Absolutely. So I just talked about the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and I described that. That is an act that the federal government requires public schools that receive federal money, and they all do, to provide a free and appropriate education to individuals who, one, have disabilities, two, the disabilities affect their learning in the classroom, and three, they require specialized instruction in order for them to learn. Remember the three-legged stool. Section 504, or 504 plan, refers to a federal law called the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and specifically Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act it's an anti-discrimination law that protects children with disabilities, okay? And in a nutshell, what it does, it says that schools are obligated to ensure that children with disabilities have equal access to the academic programming that the school is providing to non-disabled kids, right? Equal access. What that means is if I have a disability and I can't access the instruction so that I am on an equal basis in terms of the opportunity that a non-disabled kid would have, then the school has to make some adjustments, and we call these adjustments accommodation. To ensure that I have equal access, right? So let's pretend that, I don't know, I can't, let me think of an example. I don't know, for some reason I have in my mind an example of where your kid has a very serious vision problem. Or, you know, better yet, your kid has a hearing problem, okay? And your kid, I mean, because of the hearing problem, he or she can't hear the teacher or doesn't hear the teacher very well, right? So I want to make sure that we want to make sure that that hearing impaired child has access to the teacher's voice so that he can hear what the teacher says or be able to access what the teacher is doing in the same way as the child who's sitting next to him who does not have a hearing problem. So one accommodation may be that the teacher wears a microphone to amplify his or her voice so that hearing impaired child can hear the lesson better, right? So the accommodation is that the teacher is going to wear this device whenever the teacher is providing instruction while this child is in the classroom, right? Or for example, the child has attention deficit disorder and the child seems to do better. You know, psychologists have determined or has recommended that this child be put in the front of the classroom closer to the teacher, because when the child is in the front of the classroom and closer to the teacher, his attention is greater. So the accommodation is seating, sit this child within 6 feet of the teacher. That's the accommodation that will, assist this child to have access to the instruction, on, if not an equal, a close to equal basis. It will give him the opportunity to access the instruction on an equal basis with his non-disabled peers. So often you see 504 plans drafted when the child has a health concern or some other issue that again impedes his or her access to the curriculum. Now, another difference. So you see that 504 is about equality, of opportunity or access to the curriculum. Whereas the IEP says, I have a disability that impacts my learning, so you got to give me specialized instruction. 504 plans don't necessarily require specialized instruction. Mm. They're just saying, the purpose of the plan, again, is to give my child access. And so that's one of the key differences. It's two different laws. It's two different concepts, right? Access versus specialized instruction, okay?
Yes. It's a lot. When you're talking about access, though, it brings me back to, COVID and this whole situation. And, for a lot of parents on this call right now, they've already gone through the process, have some, accommodations identified, IEP goals, established. Yeah. Now here we are, COVID and distance learning. And, because of, it might be because of my child's learning differences, online is not really working, like in terms of accessing the curriculum. Yes, on the screen, but to be able to sit and focus and do that, like what in the world? So can we talk, definitely about
distance education and how, parents can make sure these things that we've determined already that my child needs, how can I make sure that they're getting them online?
This is the million dollar, it's a $1 billion question. And if anyone has the answer, well, then they should be, they should be rich. This is going to be like building a plane as it's in the air. I'm not sure how schools are going to do it in practice. I suspect there's a way to poll all of you parents on the call and to ask you, how did it go? I mean, to the extent your kid had an IEP, how did it go when, if your child attended Prince George's County Public Schools or some other county, when the school shut down and online learning commenced, how did it go? I venture a guess to say it didn't go very well. I'll give you an example. I mean, so I have had clients whose children's IEPs required that the children receive something called behavioral support services, which is like counseling, right? And normally when you get counseling, you go into the school psychologist's office or the school social worker's office. You might have a one-on-one session or a group session, right? And I know children who were entitled to that under their IEP. And when the schools closed in March or April or February, whenever they closed, they didn't get any of that for the rest of the semester. And I challenged that because we all have heard of teletherapy, right?
Yeah.
So you can't tell me that the psychologist could not have connected with your child. And you can't tell me that a psychologist could not only is there such a thing as teletherapy, many jurisdictions, I know DC did it, and I believe that Maryland did it as well. They have provisions in their law which say, a psychologist who's providing therapeutic service in the District of Columbia must be licensed in the District of Columbia when providing services to District of Columbia students.
Right, and then they relaxed it.
Right, they suspended that requirement.
They sure did. Sure did.
So what that means is that, if for some reason no one was available in DC, but you knew a psychologist in Maryland and you lived in DC, that Maryland therapist could have provided counseling services to your DC child and vice versa, right? But I had some schools say, I asked, well, are you going to provide the behavioral support? Well, we can't answer that. Well, what do you mean we can't answer that? We don't know. Well, we can't do it because of COVID. I said, there's such a thing as teletherapy. Well, we don't want to spend an hour on the phone with a child. Well, it doesn't have to be on the phone. You can do a Zoom call. I mean, everybody's doing this. So, it's an example where, and I share this, parents, I think, look, give yourself some credit for what you believe or what you think, be creative on your own, right? Talk among yourselves, your spouse, your partner, or if you don't have a partner, talk to a friend or somebody else who might have a child with a disability, or an advocate, and get their ideas about how the school might be able to service your kid. I mean, there is no right or wrong answer now. Schools understand that first of all, let me say this. The Department of Education, which is responsible for enforcing IDEA, right, has made it clear that they're not waiving any of the obligations that schools have under the law to provide special educated and related services. They said, look, we understand it's COVID. You're still required to do this. Figure it out.
Amen.
So they have to do it. So what's my advice is that whatever your kid needs, you need to think about what your kids needs and then go directly to the school and ask them for their plan about how they're going to deliver it. Right? So if normally your kid, I don't know, let's say your kid gets 5 hours a week of specialized instruction in reading. Well, then what that means is when the Zoom call happens where they're educating all of the children, right, in reading, that doesn't satisfy the 5 hours of specialized instruction that your kid is supposed to have, right? So you got to say to the say to the teacher, the specialized instructor, the special education instructor. My kid normally gets pulled out of the room and gets an hour a day of specialized reading instruction. How are you going to do that during COVID? Right? And then all of the other sort of natural questions, I think, arise. Look, we're adults and we can barely stay on a Zoom call for 45 minutes. What do you think that's like for a child, particularly a child with a disability, staying on a Zoom call for an hour? So some of this may require, it's going to require you, as parents, asking the school for a plan on how you're going to provide whatever the specialized instruction or the service, the related service might be. But it's going to require flexibility on everybody's part to deal with the reality of the difficulty of doing this with kids. So my kid doesn't have a disability, but I watched, when they had online learning with my kid, and he goes to an all-boys school. Those boys, and some of them were in bed on the Zoom call, half asleep. It was ridiculous. The teacher interrupted class. It was like every 10 minutes to tell boys to stop drawing on the document that he put up there. They just could not, they had a hard time adapting to this new format of teaching. And so we have to think the same thing. If you got a kid with attention deficit disorder, it's going to require some planning on your part, and it's difficult. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment, right? So I've got to share this with my kid when he's in school doing his Zoom calls. If he had attention issues, I would have to be concerned. Does he have a quiet place to sit down and do this Zoom call? Are there distractions? If he needs a fidget, do I have one? Did he have a fidget at school when he was distracted? Special education coordinator, should I get it a fidget? What else do you think I can do to sort of, approach the environment that he had when he was in school, so that, again, he can access learning and receive the specialized instruction? So,
I think an additional challenge for the Keys, she wants to comment here, but I think an additional challenge that, we have in public safety is, we're essential employees. And so even being able to be home, to telework and kind of be available is really not always an option. Sometimes maybe your spouse has that flexibility, but we have, a lot of parents who are single parents and are trying to figure this out. Like, what in the world am I supposed to do if I'm at work, but you're at home, supposed to be online?
Absolutely. It's a huge issue. You have a child who is old enough to stay home while you're at work. Maybe the child's 11 or 12 years old. But if you leave that child alone for 7 or 8 hours while you're at work, they're not going to do anything. I can tell you, my kid, the way his online instruction was set up, they have classes from like 8 to 12 or 8 to 11. They get a break, and then they might have one class in the afternoon. And so they're done about 1 o'clock, right? But they say, okay, you're done with the instruction. Here are your assignments for the day. You got to turn them in by 5 o'clock. I don't know how you guys, what your experience was. My boy wasn't doing his work. And it's because, this is like college. You look at the video, and then the professor gives you an assignment, and it's your responsibility to turn it in. They're not used to that. Everything is
and they're not ready for that. They're not at that level of maturity, period.
Well, again, depending on what your child's specific needs are, I urge parents to think among themselves, and also to ask for a meeting with the IEP team to try to figure out what's best for your child, right? It's going to be important that you do that. You're going to have to, it's going to require working together to try to figure this out.
Don't accept no for an answer. Don't accept.
No, I would not accept no for an answer. And it's for the reason that I just stated. They have not been relieved of their obligation to provide the specialized instruction and any other services which are required in order that your child receive a FAPE, a free and appropriate.
Got it. Got it. It might be something creative out of the box, but it still should be done.
And it may require amendments to the IEP, and that's okay too, right? That's okay too. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Okay. Keisha Keys, you wanna?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to raise my hand. I was actually looking at the chat.
All right, that's fine.
Are there comments? Everything okay in the chat? Are there any questions? Oh, did somebody put a question in the chat? Should we address that?
Oh, yeah. Was anything put in place for ESOL?
Was anything put in place for ESOL? Okay, I'm not sure how to answer that question, but let me take a guess. I mean, children who speak other language, they're English language learners, are also entitled to free and appropriate education under the IDEA, right? So the obligations of the schools with respect to English language learners are the same as they are with respect to proficient speakers of English when it comes to disabilities and providing a free and appropriate education. I hope that answers your question.
So it's the same thing, like don't accept no for an answer, like the school should be doing something.
Absolutely. So, I mean, and if the question is, my child is an English language learner, should he continue to receive English language instruction? Yes, absolutely. Again, the school doesn't escape its obligation to do that just because we're in a COVID pandemic. I mean, they've got to find some creative way to do it. And hopefully they're doing that.
My son's IEP talks about additional adult aid as an accommodation. What do you think is equitable in this time of COVID?
That is tough. So I don't know the details of what your child's aid is supposed to do. Some aids are there to deal with behavioral issues. Some aids are there to help with sort of physiological issues, right? Like if your child can't use his or her hands, or your child might have a disability that impairs his or her ability to sit up straight, or your child uses a wheelchair, or I mean, for instance, I have clients whose speech is so impaired that they need to use a text-to-speech device, and they may need some help with that. That becomes difficult. How do you provide an aid in the age of COVID? I mean, is the aid COVID-free? Has that aid been tested? Do you want the aid in your home? And the aid may have some issues, like, are the people in the family at the home site, are they COVID-free? Have they been tested? Don't know the answer to that question. I can tell you that I do have clients who had one-to-one aids, and after schools closed in the spring, those aids weren't coming into the home, right? So it was literally the parent with the child aiding the child. So if the aid, if the aid's function is to help the child with learning, as opposed to helping keep the child's back straight, or changing the child if the child needs to be changed because he or she is incontinent. But if the function is to help with learning, again, I would approach the school and ask them how do they intend to adapt to deal with the fact that maybe the schools are not sending aids out to people's homes. I mean, it may be practically impossible, right, to do. So again, you need to put that question to the school and ask them what are their plans to deal with the fact that an aide who is there to assist my child with learning is not available. And that's how I'd answer that question.
I did have another question that was sent to me. It was by wives of one of our officers, unable to join the call. and she wanted some guidance. She said, our daughter is 13 years old, going into 7th grade in St. Mary's County Public School with an IEP that has a one-on-one accommodation. Oh, this is basically the
Similar question. Yeah.
Yeah, they've not given us our plan yet, but if they give us the same plan as others without the one-on-one, what questions should we ask?
Yeah. I mean, I think you start with, my kid has a one-to-one aide. What's the school going to do? What is the school or school system going to do to provide the service that the one-to-one aide would have provided had we not had COVID?
Mm-hmm.
And the conversation should proceed from there. I just don't know what the school system in St. Mary's County is doing.
Yeah.
There could be a number of different configurations. I mean, I don't know I know in DC that they're going to start off online. Some schools are starting off online, and they're going to then relook at it in November, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
October. I think that's what DC
Right.
is looking at in November. And maybe after November, they'll do a hybrid type of situation where you do some learning online and some learning will be literally on campus at the school. So the school might say, okay, when we get to our hybrid model, that's when you'll have your one-to-one aid and we'll provide, your services. So you have to sort of start with your list of questions, which is, what are you doing to provide, how will you adapt to provide the service that my child's IEP requires now? And then, just think about your concerns.
Mm-hmm.
You're concerned about an aide coming to the house, or what will happen in a hybrid model. Okay, in a hybrid model, how many kids are going to be in the classroom when my kid comes in?
Mm-hmm.
If my kid has transportation, how many people are going to be on the bus? Will the bus driver be wearing masks? All of those questions are relevant questions. How long will it be? I know my kid, if in a hybrid model, half the week is online and half the week is going to be, or one day a week you come into the school, but my IEP says that I get 4 hours a week of specialized instruction. I know you're not going to provide 4 hours on the Friday that my kid comes in. So what are we going to do? Are we going to scale back the hours just for the period of this hybrid model? So again, I guess the theme of what I'm saying is ask questions, be creative, listen, feel empowered to make suggestions yourself, and also, you can whatever you agree with the school in way of modifications to deal with the initial model, say from August to November. Feel free to put a time limit on it. Say, we're going to do this until school opens and it's fully in person. Or, when school opens and we're fully in person again, let's meet again to determine how we're going to adjust back to the way things were before COVID happens. I mean, there are no set answers for any particular situation, but it's going to require parents to be proactive, ask questions, work with the IEP team to come up with some flexible answers. But again, remember, they're not off the hook.
Yeah.
Suspension of their obligations.
So we have one mom on here. She says, for essential employees, how can I as a mother teach my child with an IEP when I have to work during the day? But most importantly, she hasn't been getting any answers back from his school by phone or email. So she's reaching out to ask the questions and she's not getting any response back from the school.
I'm going to make a suggestion to all parents. And it's because, it's for a couple of reasons. First of all, this COVID pandemic is not going to be going away for a while. At least that's my opinion. I just don't see it happening for a while. We're going to have to live with it. We just talked about working with the school, but this parent is basically telling me the school's not working with them.
Yeah.
In that case, you're going to have to start documenting things in writing. And you're documenting your reach out to the school. You're documenting the school's non-responsiveness, right? And it may come to the point where it's time, request an IEP meeting. By the way, during COVID, your right to demand an IEP meeting is not suspended.
Right.
You raise an IEP meeting and then you state everything that's been happening in your case, that you're concerned that, well, let me see, what was the concern? Which one is it we're looking at?
From Yanni.
from Yanni. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah. Let me get either by phone. Okay. All right. Well, look, I think the question, that's a tough one because, it's not your responsibility to teach your child. You're not, parents, we aren't responsible to teach our child. I know we want to do what we can to help our children to learn, but it's the school's responsibility. So, I would write a letter saying, hey, look, I want the school to provide me a plan as to how specialized instruction is going to be provided to my kid in accordance with the terms of my IEP. For example, my kid was supposed to be pulled out 4 times a week for a half an hour of specialized instruction, one-on-one, under his IEP. How is that going to be done during online learning? Or how is the school going to adapt to provide that, right? And, and if they continue to stonewall you, you could call an IEP meeting. They may or may not ignore you. They may meet with you. But then, I guess you're going to have to document what in fact is happening. Because if the school is not providing any specialized instruction in accordance with your IEP, there's no effort to provide your kid that special half hour of services that he or she was supposed to receive pre-COVID, then they're violating the IEP at that point, right? And if they're violating the IEP, they're violating the IDEA. And if they're not providing the services under your IEP, then you have the right to file a due process complaint against the school. And if you win a due process complaint against the school, then their obligation is going to be to provide not money damages, but something called compensatory education, where they're required to pay for tutoring or for other services to help make up for what they failed to do during the COVID pandemic. And, by the way, I want to tell parents, look, to the extent that your children did not receive services this past spring, they did not receive the services that they were supposed to receive because of the pandemic, you can still file a due process complaint, right? Now, if I don't know, if the school failed to provide your kid an hour's worth of services, am I telling you to file a due process complaint over an hour? No, right? No, but if you had a situation like I described where your kid was supposed to get an hour of behavioral support services each week, right, during COVID, and for the months of February, March, April, May, and June, that's 6 months, right, times 4, that's 24 hours of counseling by a psychologist that they did not get. Well, then, you know what? You have the right to say to the school district, I want you to provide compensatory services for the services my kid did not receive.
That seems to be like one of the next question. My child gets pulled out of class several times a week for physical and occupational therapy.
No.
COVID, she will be missing multiple sessions each week. Is there some way to get these missed sessions added back?
Absolutely. So it's just what I said. You would have
Yeah.
to, you really have to demand it from the school. And then if they don't give it to you, look, somebody said, some famous Black leader said, power concedes nothing without a demand. Well, it's the same thing with compensatory education. Here's my view. The schools shouldn't be stingy about this. We all know that COVID was it was an act of God or man-made, whatever. They couldn't control it. So if you didn't give or didn't provide the services that you were supposed to provide, because it's nobody's fault. You could argue that. Well, then fine, just make it up.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
Just make it up, and you will fund. That means the school will write a check or pay the invoices for somebody that the parent hires, right? In order to provide services that the school failed to provide on account of that. So yes, that's an option that you always have. Schools don't always. I don't know what their posture is going to be when parents demand compensatory education. I can tell you in DC, I just don't see them, saying, okay, sure, we'll just write a check. They're going to fight it. But you've got to have your ducks in a row. You've got to know, well, my kid did not receive A, B, C, D, and E. Be able to prove it, write a letter to the special education coordinator or the principal of the school and tell them that you're demanding compensatory education. And they should be able to put you in touch with the correct people, probably people from the central office of the school system who will agree to that. And they may make you sign a settlement agreement to say that that settles your claim, and you won't sue the school following that. And of course, if you have trouble, obtaining this from them, then you're going to need to contact a lawyer. Okay.
So this next one, when we went to virtual back in March, my daughter's school had a meeting in April and did an individual continuity of learning plan. And it is super limited what it covers, how long we can work under that. Can we ask to have it reevaluated? Can they go back? It should go back and say,
Okay, continuity of learning plan. I'm not familiar with that. Katie, would you kindly, I want to know whether this kid attends public school or private school. I have not heard of an individual continuity of learning plan. I'm not sure what that is. So I'd want to know. I mean, of course, you can ask the school. Yeah, you can.
It's me.
Oh, it's you. Okay.
That was my question. So it looks very similar to her IEP. We did like an IEP meeting, but it wasn't. It was like a real short meeting. And I can actually, I'm walking down to my office to go grab it. So I had to look it up to see what it's called. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
So your child has an IEP?
Yes, and she goes to a public school. She actually goes, she doesn't go, she goes to a all special needs school, but it's a public school.
Yes, okay. So why was this plan presented to you? I don't explain that.
Because we weren't going to be able to do all of her goals via e-learning. So, because she had like a full-on IEP, which included PT, OT, all kinds of speech and stuff. Right. So they did which is like her main IEP is like, I don't know, 30 pages long or whatever it is. And so they did, see if I can flip this around.
ICL.
They did
continuity of learning. Okay, I see it. That's interesting. So what services are provided under this thing?
So it's really more just what they basically kind of did is picked goals off of her full IEP that they thought they'd be able to work on while like in the interim of the end of last school year, because this was obviously before they knew whether we were coming back or not. So they had kind of picked a few goals that they thought that she was they kind of picked goals that she was already close to mastering to continue working on so she wouldn't lose those skills. But they didn't necessarily pick goals that are new skills because they weren't sure that they would be able to introduce super new skills to her via e-learning, because they did 2 sessions. So basically they did Google Classrooms like everybody else did, and they had activities and things on there, but then her school did 2 30 to 45 minute sessions with each, because her class is really small. There's less than 10 kids in each of their classes. So they did, instead of doing like a whole classroom, they did an individual like e-learning session with each kid. Okay. So we had like an individual session for 45 minutes, half hour to 45 minutes twice a week with her teacher and then the other aides that were in her class normally. And they worked on the skills that were on this continuum learning plan.
And what is your concern? Are you concerned that your kid did not make?
Well, no, she didn't necessarily lose. She didn't lose any skills like that, but she didn't necessarily gain any new ones. My more concern is that we kind of cut out all of her extra services because they were scrambling. It was kind of what they did because they were scrambling at the end of the year. But now we're looking at walking into the next school year like this, and her OT and speech goals aren't on here. Oh. They're just like more her like educational goals that I'm more concerned, because we did she was actually due for a full IEP meeting while we were on off for COVID as well. So we did that. So we have a full IEP, but we're not necessarily working under that one.
Okay.
We're still working under this continuing
Okay.
plan
Okay.
because we're not back in school yet.
Well, you know, my concern is, again, I'd love to see how that thing is written. You know, and what county is this, by the way? We're in
Anne Arundel County.
Okay. I'd love to see how it's written. I'd love to see if it makes any reference to IEP and how it references the IEP. You know,
it does. It says these services, it says the individual continuing learning plan will be implemented for Riley, which is my daughter, throughout the period of time which schools are closed. These services are based on Riley's current IEP. Once the school system is able to resume regular programming, the services outlined in the IEP will be implemented in their entirety, is what the first paragraph of it says.
So that sounds like what I talked about earlier that parents should consider doing, meaning amend the IEP to adapt to whatever the situation is during COVID, right? That sort of impacts the abilities of the school to provide services. And then, you know, at some point that is mutually agreed between the parent and the school, agree, hey, look, when we're back in school or when we're back in person, then the regular IEP applies again. But, you know, sort of my thinking as a lawyer is that, you know, well, so first of all, in your county, what's happening? What's happening starting in August or September? Are they going back in person or what?
No, we're not going. We're doing completely virtual learning.
So
the school has been very good with us in terms of working with us. We're actually in the process of transferring to different schools because we moved last August, and the school is actually letting us stay with her current teachers until we go back into the actual building, because her current teacher, along with myself, did not feel that she would transition to trying to do e-learning with people she had no idea who they were. So the school's been great about that. Her new principal, her current principal, and her current teacher are all totally on board with us doing that. So they are, I mean, it's not like they're not trying to work with us. I mean, I feel like they're trying to do the best they can. But my concern really is that I personally, I don't know that we're actually going to ever go back to school at all this year. And I don't know that what this continuum learning plan that we have going on is beefy enough for the next year. Is really my concern.
So I tell you what, I mean, you know, we should talk more. I mean, I'm going to share with everybody my telephone number. I will counsel you, one, that I am barred just in the District of Columbia. So I'm going to be I got to be very careful about providing legal advice, right? But I can certainly help you issue spot. I'll give everyone my number now, and you can just call me in case we don't get to everybody's questions.
Oh, you know what? I'll email it. I have everybody's email. Okay. I'll email out your full contact information.
Right. But Katie, you know, once you get my number, you can feel free to call me, and we can talk more about this.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So we had another comment. What do you think about utilizing some of the substitutes as support mechanisms in some of these areas? Zooming, one-on-one sessions for some of the children on IEP. Many of them can work with a student in a one-on-one situation, and this can help with substitute unemployment. In addition, some of the teachers who did not pass the praxis and were released, they might also be possibilities. I'm confused with your statement that we as parents are not responsible for teaching our children. We definitely are responsible for teaching our children, as I was taught by my family members in conjunction with the formal education by school systems.
Right. So let me work backwards. So my comment was that the obligation to provide special education and related services is the obligation of the school district, right? So a parent, you know, raised a practical issue. If I have a child with an IEP and I have to go to work, and my child is at home, and my child is supposed to be receiving specialized instruction under the IEP, but how, I'm not sure that that's being done, or how is it going to be done? How do I instruct my child? And my point here is that if the IEP says that you're supposed to receive 3 hours of specialized instruction in math per week, that's not your responsibility. That is the school district's responsibility. And that was really the only point that I'm making, is that the school district's responsibility remains unchanged, right? The Department of Education, Betsy DeVos, came out and issued a statement saying, the issue was whether she wanted to go to Congress and obtain the ability to waive the school's obligations under IDEA. And she essentially told Congress, I don't want that waiver authority. I don't need that. Schools, you're still obligated to provide those special education, specialized instruction and related services. As to using substitutes, I think that the writer is referring to substitute teachers.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess that depends on the school system. I mean, so the question that comes in my mind is, what are the qualifications of those substitute teachers to provide specialized instruction? How are they going to do it, right? I can tell you that in the District of Columbia, there is an organization called Advocates for Justice in Education, which became aware of a number of DC public schools, which had self-contained rooms that were established to provide specialized instruction to children with special needs. And it was in those rooms, it was only kids with disabilities. And you might have had a situation in a number of those schools where the specialized, the special education teacher had to take leave. Maybe the special education teacher went out on maternity leave or took some other leave of absence. And so DC put long-term substitutes in those classrooms who were not qualified, certified teachers, right? And what did AJE, the advocacy organization, do? They filed a state complaint against DCPS about that. And they got a letter of decision which said DCPS owes all of the children who were in those rooms that were being taught by uncertified, unqualified teachers, owes each of those children compensatory education for every hour that they were there teaching those kids.
Wow.
So I do say that with I say this with a caveat. Having an uncertified or not highly educated, not highly qualified special education teacher providing specialized instruction, at least in DC, that by itself doesn't mean that that the school is not providing your child a FAPE, right? So there may be a way to do what the writer is suggesting, which is, I don't know, maybe, for example, if the special education instructor at the school is working one-on-one with those substitute teachers and directing them and telling them exactly what to do, maybe that is providing a FAPE, right? Mm-hmm. That wasn't the case in the example that I just gave, right? You had folks, I mean, it could be Joe Blow, the securities lawyer who has never taught a day in his life. He quit a securities law job and he decides he's going to be a substitute teacher, but he's going to teach a dyslexic child. If I'm the lawyer, I'm going to argue that guy was not qualified to provide the services, and he in fact didn't provide specialized instruction for my dyslexic child. And by the way, I can show it because from the period of time that guy started teaching my child till 6 months later, my child made no progress on his IEP goals, right?
Okay, so I'm the author of that. And I think what I really wanted to say is that there are a lot of qualified previous teachers who retired. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So the pool of substitute teachers is vast. Mm-hmm. You have a lot of qualified people that could sit one-on-one with a student so that they could get that 1 hour a week one-on-one instruction. Now, I know there's some situations where the students, they really do need that specialized individual, but there are some students that just need that time to be one-on-one with someone so that they pick up those concepts. So I'm really speaking about that. Then there are many students who, teachers or instructors who didn't pass the praxis, but have taught for like 3-5 years. And because they didn't pass it at the end of that, they're kicked out of the school system. However, they're more than qualified to be in a one-on-one situation with students to support the IEP programs. That's
pretty much what I'm talking about.
Right. Well, I mean, that's going to be an individual school district decision, and it's going to certainly take into account some of the things that I mentioned. And here's the other thing that I don't know if many of you have been reading about. Parents. There's this whole issue of parents sort of forming educational pods.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And what is starting to happen is, you've got the regular school teachers. Presumably, they're still employed by the school districts, right? But let's say you do have some retired school teachers, and the school district hasn't hired them, as Ms. Banks had suggested, to help out with this one-on-one instruction. Well, what is starting to happen is parents are deciding that they're going to split it up, and they're going to hire this person to teach their kids in a pod to supplement the online instruction. So, I don't know as a policy matter whether it would work or not. I think it's a great idea. Why not? I mean, some of these retired teachers are willing to do that kind of work. Some of them are recently retired, right? I have a former colleague. I mean, she started teaching in DC schools when she was in her mid-20s. She's 40-something years old, and she recently decided she's going to retire and start a tutoring business. I mean, and she's exactly the kind of person who these parents are looking to hire to come and teach 3 or 4 kids who are in a pod to help supplement the online learning. So I think it's a great idea. It's a sort of policy thing that that school districts may want to consider.
2 more comments. I see Kamal wanted to make a comment. So you can, Kamal, there you go.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Greetings and thank you for providing this resource. I have a daughter who has an IEP. She's had one for a while, and they wanted to put her in a special education program at a different school. We did it for a year, and we felt that the people in that program had profound learning issues that did not help her. So we brought her back to her home school and put her in general education classes. But now the kids in her age group are leaving her behind. What can we do? Because we seem like we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. We don't want to have her feel like she's not really, learning anything, but we don't want to put her back in that special program where, she's with people who aren't verbal. She's a very, very highly verbal kid with Down syndrome, loving and everything, but she has reading and speech issues. Really nothing cognitive. Not too much.
Right. So, the issue that you raise is one of placement, right? So, what I heard you say is that, let me ask this question, sir. The school the specialized school that she went to, was that a public school or was it a private school?
It wasn't a specialized school. It was a specialized program. Within Baltimore County Public Schools.
Okay. All right. So from what I hear you saying, it sounds like that program was inappropriate for her, right? And I've seen that. For instance, I've seen children who may have had one cognitive issue or another, or a learning disability, who were not autistic, put into an autism program. It was completely inappropriate for them, right? Or a child such as yours, sir, who you told me is very verbal, put into a classroom with completely nonverbal students. These are inappropriate placements. And when that happens, the school has violated its obligation to provide a free and appropriate education because that placement was inappropriate for your child. So you could argue that one theory that you may have available to you is, my child was in that inappropriate placement for a year. Had my child been in an appropriate placement, my child would have made progress. And the opposite of that, because my child was in that inappropriate placement, my child made no progress, right? So these are potential claims that you might have under the IDEA, which you could raise in a due process complaint. And again, what would you want from that? Well, I want compensatory education. I want tutoring to make up for the services and the instruction that you should have provided for my child in an appropriate placement, but which my child didn't get because you had her in an inappropriate placement.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So now your kid is back, and it still seems like the placement's inappropriate. It seems like, the classroom that she's in, they're leaving her behind. And again, one of the questions for me is she making progress? Now, you're not a psychologist, you're not a neuropsychologist, and neither am I. I'm a lawyer. I don't know these things. But again, a psychologist can answer these questions. So one thing that you can do, you can look at the data and just using your own common sense and your gut, determine, is my kid making progress? Your kid's supposed to get an IEP progress report where schools are supposed to measure, how's she doing on her IEP goals? Now, a lot of times schools try to cover themselves, and the child is always making progress. When you observe your child at home, she's not making progress, right? So looking at the IEP progress reports, looking at the regular progress reports, observing what your child is able to do at home. These are some indicators or some data that you need to think about. And if you determine that your child is not making progress, again, I want to call an IEP meeting. I think my child's placement is inappropriate. Or if you're not sure, go and get your own independent evaluation, meaning the school has their psychologists who may have evaluated your child to determine that she has a disability, right? And you don't trust the school, right? Well, you can, if you can ask the school to fund an independent evaluation of your child, or they can reevaluate your child to determine what's going on with your child now. Has the child made progress? And if not, then we have to do something. Mm-hmm. So again, some of this is going to be you collecting information, progress reports, IEP progress reports, observing what your child is doing at school and in class, at home, and then determining, look, do I want to approach the school and make another change? And by the way, if the school specialized program that she went to was inappropriate, and you believe that the current, Gen Ed classroom placement is also inappropriate, there's still a couple of options. One, maybe there's some maybe the child needs an adjustment to her IEP. Maybe she needs to be pulled out of that special education classroom. Again, this assumes that they're attending class in person, pulled out and get specialized instruction one-on-one at the general ed school. Or if the school is unable to make some adjustment that makes sense, all right, that can result in her receiving a free and appropriate education, then maybe the school could say, hey, look, we can't do it, but we will pay for your child to go to a non-public private school that can service her. And there's some schools out there in Baltimore. So
you don't consult in Maryland, right?
I don't, but I do have a colleague who was not able to be on this call, who is barred in Maryland. And so to all of you parents who have kids in Maryland schools, I will be able to provide you a name and telephone number of a lawyer who actually just works a couple of blocks from me here on Capitol Hill, who is barred in Maryland and does work in Maryland.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So you know what? So that brings up my last question. There was another comment, but unfortunately the writer, it looks like she had to go. Mm-hmm. But I guess the last question as we wrap this up is, at what point should a family enlist the aid of an attorney like yourself? Like, when do you know, like, okay, we got to bring in the big,
Look, there's so many issues when you decide that you want to hire an attorney. First, you got to find one that you can trust, one that you believe can advocate for you in the way that you want, help you accomplish your objectives. And the other part about this, attorneys cost money. Mm-hmm. And there's another part of this, which is parents, even though you're not attorneys or you're not psychologists, you know your kids. And there are some things that you can do to advocate for yourselves. And maybe that's the subject of another mm-hmm. one of these calls, sort of parent advocacy. I think it's very, very important. I would say, certainly, if you believe that your kid is not making progress on his or her IEP goals, it's time to hire a lawyer. If your kid is expressing frustration or acting out in a way that you believe is not, the way he or she is at home, or you believe that the acting out, whether at home or at school, is a manifestation of an academic or cognitive issue that they're struggling with at school, it's probably time to and this has been going on for a period of time. Mm-hmm. Probably time to talk to a lawyer. If you are a parent that is experienced with advocacy and has reached a brick wall with the school, it's time to hire a lawyer. And then, what you can do, you can call the lawyer and ask the lawyer, is it time to hire you? So those are some sort of, milestones I think that parents should be aware of, that would indicate that it's time to hire a lawyer. Your child's not making progress, school's ignoring you, your child's definitely not receiving the services. Oh, here's another one. Your child, your child understands what he or she is supposed to receive, right, in the way of services. He knows that the special education teacher is supposed to come and get him or her, and they're supposed to go out of the classroom a half an hour, or they're supposed to stay in the class with them a half an hour a day. And that's not happening. Or they're supposed to receive counseling and the counselor never comes, or they're not seeing the counselor. And your child is telling you, I'm not learning. I don't understand what's going on. These are indications that it may be time to get a lawyer. One other thing, you have the right to understand the schedule that the school has written out and by which it will implement the terms in the IEP. So it says that your child is supposed to get 30 minutes of specialized reading instruction a day. You should know what days she's getting it, what time she's getting it, right? And who's providing it. And is it being provided in accordance with the IEP? If it says it's supposed to be provided inside the gen ed classroom, you should ask your child, does Miss So-and-so come in the classroom and come and teach you reading? Are you learning anything? Do you feel like you understand what's going on? And these are some of the milestones that should indicate when it's time to start escalating and reaching out to an attorney.
Gotcha.
Okay?
Yes, well, I want to thank you, and several people chimed in. Thank you so much for your expertise and, for sharing your time with us. We definitely would love to have you back in future.
Absolutely.
So as I mentioned to everyone before, hopefully, if you were on the call and heard me, this is part of a monthly support group that we plan to offer for parents who have children with special needs, so that you're not feeling isolated alone, and so that you all can benefit from the knowledge and experiences of the group. So I will be making this session available. I need to figure out how to upload it and get it out. I'm only making it available to those of you who attended, and those who have reached out to me because they weren't able to attend. So I'm not sending it out department-wide or agency-wide. I will also be including Mr. Atwell's contact information and his colleague, who is barred in Maryland.
Yes,
with that, I want to thank you. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We're ending on time. Thank you, and we will definitely let you know when we're getting together again next month. Thank you.
Thank you, parents, and thank you, Ainisha. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with the parents. Bye, everybody.
Have a great afternoon, evening. Bye-bye.